All right, everybody. Today on the show, I am talking to David Reaboi. David is a national security expert. He's a jazz aficionado, and he's a bodybuilder. Yeah, we got some muscle on the show today. It's about time. I'm tired of carrying the show. We're gonna let him do it today. It was a great talk. I had just a great time talking with David. He's a really cool, interesting guy. We talked about his past smoking and how now he vapes, which is interesting. His story is interesting about how that happened. We talk about New York in the 90s. We talk about how uh, David ended up where he did. He's got a very interesting story that involves a lot of jazz and moving to some pretty awesome towns. And then we talk about kind of foreign policy stuff, and I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to foreign policy. And David schools me, and hopefully you guys can learn from my ignorance. That's what I'm here for. That's my job. David also has a book out called Qatar's Shadow War, so be sure to check that out. And I think that's it. Please remember to like and subscribe. That helps the algorithm, helps the channel. So I want that. Please help me. Anyways, I'll shut up now and get to my conversation with my boy, David Reaboi.
Toward the very end of high school. I mean, I smoked a pipe and I smoked a pipe in college
Sure.
and cigars. But then, you want an immediate delivery system sometimes.
Right. Oh,
And
that's my problem with the pipe and the cigars. That they take time. Sometimes you just want 5 minutes and you want that little
exactly. No,
little wake up.
yeah, exactly. And I remember seeing what was it? It's like Down by Law or something, a Jarmusch film. And it's like, okay, I want to try this. And I was at my friend's backyard deck, and a few of us were there, and I just brought a pack along, and I opened it up, and I took my first drag of an unfiltered Lucky Strike,
Okay.
and man, it knocked me on my ass.
I was about to say, did you
And,
inhale it? Because that's a punch to the
yeah. I
face.
mean,
Yeah.
I was like, and
Yeah.
and I thought the world would end, and I was like, what the hell is anyone doing with this stuff? How is this possible? But of course, like, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to try another one.
Sure.
And that eventually turned into my favorite smoke for many years. And then, sort of, for my health, I switched to Winston's,
Oh, of
which
course.
had a
Yeah.
filter.
Which has a
Yeah,
filter.
yeah,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
health. And I would
Yeah.
tell that people would be like, oh my God, how are you smoking this garbage? I'm like, no, this is actually an upgrade. It's
Yeah.
actually it's a safety upgrade. So I moved to Texas in 2014, early
Okay.
2014. And on the way, I bought like 8 cartons of Winston's
Sure.
in order to smoke, because you pass them through like Tennessee or
Uh,
something, and everything's very cheap. So
mhm.
I grabbed those, and I got to Texas, and I said, I don't want to be the guy who smokes.
Fair.
And I found a vape shop. It was across the street from the gym where I lived at the time, in Irving, outside of Dallas. And they hooked me up with a very primitive vape. I mean, this is 2014.
Right.
And then I was up the whole night vaping. And I
Oh,
said, I
really?
put down the cigarettes, and I was like, I'm going to be up all night, and I'm going to get used to this, and I'm going to experience it. So I was up until the sun came up, and I was just, vaping furiously, and just trying to get the equivalent of the nicotine hit that I was getting
Okay.
from cigarettes. And I made myself, like, kind of good sick, if that makes sense. I mean,
Right.
my nose was runny, and I just felt like, I felt like crap. But somehow I had flicked the switch, and I no longer wanted cigarettes.
Right. You
And I was a vapor that night.
interesting. And do you
Yeah.
still smoke the occasional cigarette if you're at a party and someone's
Yeah.
got one? Yeah.
Yes. So for a while, well, no, I mean, now I don't at all. I can't stand the smell. But for a while, I was curious. I was like, am I going to fall off this wagon one day? So let me try it.
Right.
let me have one. And I ended up giving away the 8 cartons of cigarettes to a friend. But I kept one. I kept one pack, and it was the one pack that said, emergencies, or just, just whatever it is. And I had that pack around with me for about a year.
Yeah.
And every couple of months I would go and I would light one up, and I would take one drag and I would put it out because it was disgusting. And, so that's when I was like, okay, I guess I'm no longer a smoker. I'm a vapor.
You're a vapor.
And that, yeah. And it's much better. It's much
Yeah.
better for a variety of reasons. I mean, not even about my health. It's not even a kind of health thing as much as it is a lifestyle thing. I
Sure.
used to wake up in the morning, put the ashtray on my chest and light up a cigarette in bed, and do the same thing going to sleep. I used to make eggs in the morning and coffee, and the coffee had a cigarette accompanying it, as did the eggs. I mean, it was nonstop rotation. I mean, how else do you go through 3 packs a day?
Right. Yeah. You're
Um,
going all the time with
yeah.
it. Do you find it like your house is cleaner without the cigarettes? Because that's
Oh yeah. Well, no, people actually want to come over now.
yeah.
People want to come over, and when they don't cross the threshold into into the apartment, they're like, they don't recoil in horror. And the truth of the matter is, very few people are smokers now today.
That's true.
And if you're out there, if you're dating, and you're a smoker, or anywhere from occasional to a heavy smoker, you can only date smokers.
Yeah.
And that really, really limits your I mean, there aren't that many great people out there in the first place, so that really limits your thing. And what ends up happening, I mean, what happened to me is that I just can't stand it.
Sure.
I mean, people are obviously free to do what they want, and I'm not a kind of ex-smoker who's waging war on smoking. But from it's just not for me.
Right. No, that makes sense. I never had a 3 pack a day habit, but I did. My roommates and I got into the habit of, well, let's just all go outside and smoke too, and then we'll come back. And then it kind of became like a little nightly routine with us, where we'd have a beer, maybe have a smoke, and just kind of relax. And then one day we're like, well, let's try this Juul thing out,
Yeah.
because all the kids are doing it, and we're only 30, so we're still kids. And so we started, and it stuck. It was fun. The
Mhm.
issue with it though is we started doing it way more, right? Because we were just occasional, go outside, have a cigarette, enjoy the
Right.
outside kind of thing. Where now it's like, well, I'm working and I can do it from inside the house, outside the house while I'm driving, and so our nicotine intake just probably went through the roof.
Sure.
But then we did try to go back to cigarettes, and it was just like this wasn't what I remember it used to be. It used
And
to
it's
kind of hit.
gritty and gross,
It's
right?
disgusting. You're just like,
Yeah.
man, I want that clean buzz, that clean little hit
Yeah.
from my Juul, instead of the not feeling gross. You can taste it in all the folds of your mouth. No, I get the switch to vaping, and it's significantly healthier for you.
Yeah, I think so. I think for sure. So, cheers.
Enjoy. What flavor you have? Do you do the fun
Um,
flavors?
I don't know. I don't know if they're fun flavors. I mean, I think what happens when you start with vaping, and in those days, and now it's different, but in those days when you started with vaping, sort of kind of Mach 1 technology, is you started with the desire to replicate a cigarette
Right.
taste.
Hmm.
So there were companies at that time that offered, I found online, there were companies that offered sort of Lucky Strike
Oh wow,
knockoff brand vape. So I was like,
wow.
okay, yeah, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. So I did it, and that was probably the first 2 years I was smoking nothing but tobacco flavor.
Hmm.
And then after that, I just started experimenting with different things, and maybe the last couple of years I've settled on fruit flavor that's not too sweet. And right now I'm really into the kind of menthol,
You're doing
like
menthol. Okay.
not menthol, but slight, slight mint.
Okay. A little refreshing. Okay. Yeah. So I want to. I was doing my research on you. I know you from Twitter. That's where I know you from.
Right.
As as it goes these days. And I went to your website and I saw that you knew Andrew Breitbart.
Yeah, very
What
well.
what was he like? I mean, he was such a like conservative media pioneer, and then he died young and suddenly. Like he
Right.
he's got, I feel like he has disciples everywhere. I think Shapiro's one of his disciples.
Yes.
Bannon's one of them. And
Well,
then
that's
there's
how
just
I
all his.
met all of these guys. I mean,
Okay.
that's how I met a lot of these folks who, and it's like when if Andrew introduced you to someone, then like that relationship is, I mean, more than likely that relationship is going to last. That's what it's one of
Really?
those things, you've been in a war with the person, and
Uh-huh.
even if you don't talk to them every day, there is a camaraderie. There's something special there because Andrew was, I think he was like, I think of Andrew like Norman Granz, who was the old, the old jazz impresario,
Okay.
who had a number of record labels, Verve being the most famous one. But he used to do this thing called Jazz at the Philharmonic, where he would go and he would say, "Okay, I'm going to put together my dream bands,
Hmm.
and I'm going to take so and so in here and so and so, this trombonist and that piano player and I'm just going to play, and I'm going to play in putting together these combinations." And obviously, the guys loved it because they all used to love to play with one another anyway.
Sure.
And it was like, okay, this, for this show, I'm playing with so and so, and and or making a record with so and so. And so what you end up having, as far as Verve goes, is you've got this amazing, over the course of hundreds, thousands of records, you've got so many different little groupings of people who were, his friends, his, the folks on his label. And Andrew was the same way. Andrew was the kind of guy who loved to put people into different, who used to love to put people together
Okay.
and in different combinations. So my phone would ring at 1 a.m. and it's Andrew in LA, and there's a bar. He's obviously in a bar because there's a lot of noise, or in a restaurant, and he says, "Hey, you need to talk to so and so and so. I'm gonna put them on. He's great, she's great. You guys work in the same space. This is gonna be like a great collaboration." So then he throws the phone over to somebody else,
That's hilarious.
and
Just
he did that all the time.
wow.
And I wish I had on my phone. I don't know what happened to my phone at that time, but I used to save all of his voicemails
Oh yeah.
because I knew not, because they were so funny. It wasn't like, I was memorializing them in some way, but they were really, really funny and great.
Yeah, he strikes me as
Yeah.
such a character. I read his book
Mm.
recently, just kind of going back and uh, exploring it all. And he's a good storyteller, but he does strike me as someone who's just clearly unique, but
Yeah.
also genuine, right? He felt very genuine to me from reading the book, and I don't know the details of it at all. But once I saw that you had spoken to him, I was like, well, wow. Now I want to meet someone who knows the famed Breitbart, because you hear about him and you hear like his mantra, right? Politics is downstream of culture. You hear that everywhere now, and I think that was his baby, if I recall, if I have that right.
Yeah, I mean, he had made that observation. I guess he made the formulation based on, um, based on many folks. I mean, Gramsci being, one
Sure.
of the the key guys on the other end of the spectrum, who realized that too.
Right.
But yeah, Andrew was wild. I mean, he was also really a lot of fun
Hmm.
in the sense that you never knew exactly what was going to happen, on one hand. But on the other hand, you could bring him home to your parents, so to speak. You could put him
Yeah.
in a serious context, and he would know when to be serious and when to, and but I mean, he was great. The first time I met him at my office, and he came in for a meeting, and he was right about to go meet uh, uh, Camille Paglia.
Oh, she's a gem.
And
Yeah.
who was his hero. And I
Yeah.
said, so, where are you guys going? And he's like, I'm going to take the train up to Philly,
Hmm.
and she wants to meet at this dive bar where she hangs out, and she just
Of
wants to
course she
shoot
does.
pool.
Yeah. Wow.
So imagine that,
Man.
that would have been a great scene. And of course, I talked to him afterwards, and he was just over the moon.
Oh, I bet. That
Yeah.
imagine being in that pool hall and just looking over and seeing
Two weirdos
Javier. Yeah,
shooting pool. Yeah.
who are these
Right.
people? And they're talking about something just it's either I have to imagine either something crazily deep or the most mundane thing ever, but exploring it in a way that I don't know, is
That
just
would just be
entertaining.
fun. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I think the two of them, had a lot in common in the sense that they are both or were both fun, which is a thing that at that time too, sort of living in a conservative world, was not common.
Oh really?
Um, yeah, I mean, there were very few fun people. There were very few, there were very few Gen X people,
Sure. What years are you
if
talking
that
about? Is
makes
this
sense.
like late Bush?
I'm talking about 2008, 2009,
Okay.
2010.
Sure.
The folks who still ran conservative world were boomers.
Right.
And occasionally you had people popping up. I mean, Ben Shapiro was novel because he was a child.
Right.
He
Yeah.
was very, very young, and he was a guy who I met through Andrew. He became
Okay.
friendly with Andrew because he was a prodigy.
Sure.
I think writing his first book, and he helped Andrew with Andrew's book. But yeah, I mean, he was a kid, and there was some other folks too. Dana Lash was also young.
Right.
She was involved. Larry O'Connor was a little bit older, but I mean, these are all people who were Joel Pollack. I mean, there are a lot of Brandon Darby. I mean, there are so many folks from the
Oh
old
yeah.
days who were kind of in this Lee Stranahan, who were in this, the old Breitbart universe, kind of pre-Bannon.
Right. It seems like I don't know. To me, it feels like that was the epicenter, and then it just exploded out all over conservatism these days, and you just see, like I said, Breitbart disciples everywhere, and it's kind of crowded out those older boomer conservatives, neocons, whatever you want to call them. Obviously, there's kind of different names to it, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
it's such a shame that he died young because you could tell he was a force. I mean, his legacy is already felt all over conservative
sure.
politics.
Yeah, and just to dispel, I mean, I just want to dispel, because every time, I'll tweet about Breitbart, maybe on his birthday or something, and something will come to mind. I'll get responses saying, was he killed? Was he, people
Sure.
who are alleging foul play. And I have to say, like, guys, he was not killed. He died of a heart attack. He had a bad heart.
Yeah.
Andrew was adopted. He did not know his family's medical history.
Yeah.
Um, he had suffered a heart attack prior, within about a year prior to his passing, that he kept under wraps. And he was trying to turn his health around, but frankly, he was not able to do it. I saw him a few weeks before he died, and he grabbed me from behind and gave me a hug, and I thought it was a homeless guy. His
Yeah.
last speech, this was at CPAC. His last speech, he looked like a wild man. He did not look healthy.
Right. And he
And
he lived kind of hard though too, didn't he? I know
yeah,
he talks about his college life being a fun time to put it that way. But it seems like he wasn't kind to his body for a lot of his life.
yeah. I don't think. I mean, to be honest with you, I think in some ways you could say that Twitter killed him,
Mm,
because he was an addict. He was a
right.
total addict. He was an addict with a timeline. He was
Hmm.
an addict of. He ended up becoming addicted to like the outrage loop. So if
Yeah.
you said, Andrew Breitbart, you were, a this and a that and a this and that to him on Twitter, he would retweet that, because in his mind he was saying, I'm going to show a mirror. I'm going to project a mirror onto the left and say, this is how horrible you guys are. and I want everyone to see what kind of shit that comes out of your mouths, and that's fine for a second.
Right.
But when it goes over the course of years, and then of course it becomes an incentive, it gives them an incentive to be as mean as possible,
All right. Yeah.
um, knowing that he'll retweet them.
Yeah.
So he's living his life completely plugged in. He's kind of in the matrix, and he's living in an outrage loop of Twitter, and it's just not healthy. It's not
No.
healthy at all. And I mean, if he was here for a moment, I would say, dude, get the hell off Twitter.
Yeah.
Or I mean, at least put it down, or figure out a way to use it that's not so toxic on, toxic and taxing on your psyche.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, those are the early days of social media. So we didn't even know at that
Right.
point, really. I mean, everyone now knows that social media is terrible and not, I don't even know. At some point, it's not even fun anymore. Like, when was the last time anyone went on Facebook? But
Oh, years.
yeah, same. It's like I go there because I'm in advertising, and that's it. But yeah, it's, he got caught up in it. But that's kind of, seems like that was his world, right? He was right on that cutting edge.
Mhm.
He liked to live there, and yeah, I can
This is
understand
a
why.
good point. This is a great point that you make, which is that we didn't know. I mean, it's like good, but bringing it back to smoking. It's like
Right.
smoking in the old days. We we knew it was. I mean, we knew it made people cough,
Right.
and all that stuff, and like, okay, my lungs hurt, but we didn't truly understand the the kind of the intensity of harm.
Right.
And now I think we kind of better understand it. If you work a job where you are online, your part of your responsibility is to be online.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're working in a mine. You really need to limit the exposure that you
Yeah,
have.
I think that's what a lot of people do, is at least people who do it for work and aren't just kind of hooked up to it, they
Right.
put it down. They make sure that they have their quality time without the phone, because you can just feel it kind of sucking your life away in a sense,
Mhm.
right? Especially if
For
you're
sure.
aware to it. Although I do think a lot of people are not aware of the fact that they're just kind of giving their life over to these companies and to all these people that don't care about their time.
Right.
Yeah.
And all their data.
And all their data, which,
Everything they care about in life
yes,
is handed
everything
over.
they care about and who they are and what they do, all
Right.
of their actions. Here, know everything about me.
Mhm.
Luckily now it's only for ads. Hopefully it stays that way and doesn't get worse.
Well, no, but then I mean, if you search, um, I mean, I don't know the most random thing. I don't know. I mean, you search, uh, you search for hubcaps,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever 1973 Chevy, and all of a sudden, I mean, you didn't do that by mistake.
Right.
All of a sudden they have you pegged,
Oh yeah.
as someone that's interested in old cars, somebody's in, blah, 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 an old Chevy. And I mean, they can learn a tremendous amount about you just with, just with a day's searches.
Oh
You spend
sure.
8 hours online and you search Google a couple times, they can put together your life.
Yeah. And
It's just crazy to think about.
it's interesting just how, once you have like 3 or 4 data points on someone, you can really pin down what kind of person they are and what their beliefs
Mhm.
are, and all that kind of stuff. So the profiles they can build on you are thorough, I would say.
Mhm.
And that's problematic that they have that information. But you, working with Breitbart, you specialized in foreign policy. Is that how that
Yeah.
went?
So,
What drew
so
you to foreign policy? That's such a
oh, it's been my kind of it's been my thing since I was a kid. I was always interested in that. I grew up, my family, they were Reagan Democrats,
okay.
real Cold Warrior type people, because they're from Romania
Okay.
and they came in the 1960s. Were kind of ethnic Hungarian Jews, Romania, and so I grew up with the awareness of, not only the, communism, the evils of communism, but also the evils of the Nazis, and
Sure.
because they were, the family
Yeah.
was definitely affected by the Holocaust as well.
Sure.
So I always grew up knowing that humanity is capable of horrible things,
Sure.
and these things matter. What goes on outside of our borders, and how we deal with them matters. I mean, somebody's got to think about it.
Yeah.
And then I was also there in New York City, actually in Lower Manhattan and in Brooklyn on 9/11.
Oh, wow.
So I experienced that. I saw it. My deck had documents from the World Trade Center that kind of flew, papers and things like that kind of flew over into Brooklyn. And I knew immediately who it was because I wasn't an idiot. Who was behind it and what that meant. So for a long time, I was fascinated by the idea that our enemies have what we would consider to be a threat doctrine that is knowable,
Hmm.
and they fight us not for kind of bullshit psychobabble reasons, but because they have let's say an internally coherent narrative about the world that they follow, that leads them, and frankly millions of others and their supporters, to these conclusions. So in my mind, it was a dereliction of duty, and a massive one, to not try to figure out on their own terms why the enemy is attacking us and why we're engaged in this war,
So you're
which
saying
is the
it's
war
more
on
than
terror.
just they hate us for our freedom? It's not
Well, I mean,
that
you
simple
could say
platitude.
that's actually not where. I mean, it's oversimplified,
Sure.
but I would rather have they hate us for our freedom
Hmm.
than they hate us because we are racist,
Sure.
or they hate us because for some kind of gangland dynamics BS reason, for some other kind of sociological reason that kind of requires no input from anybody. It's like a social construction reason. It makes more sense to say they hate us for our freedoms, for example, than it is to say they hate us because of climate change,
Yeah.
and their worldview is, and they were pushed into this because of a quest for resources. Like,
Right.
it's nonsense.
Well, it's
Um,
like it's an attempt to
yeah.
avoid blaming the bad guys in this case, right? Like it seems like a lot of
Well,
it's
right, right,
you're a victim of circumstance. It's not any sort of belief or uh rational reason, or rational, but you know what I mean. Like
right.
it's someone can be blamed. Someone can be at fault here. It's not just uh we did this to ourselves. There's a lot of, I think, yeah, trying to pass off the blame or trying not to blame people when terrible things have come from this that can be blamed.
Right. Right. Yeah. And if you want to even, I mean, forget about winning. If you want to even think it through intelligently, you owe it to yourself, and the situation you find yourself in, to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to make the best case possible. I'm going to try to understand the best case possible for why they're doing what they're doing.
Sure.
Um, you know, and uh, and of course, this led me down the path, not very long after, into kind of Strauss and a kind of rejection of historicism,
Sure.
and the idea this kind of became something that I saw was very important, because I was already doing it with music, which is there is a kind of you know I think that when listening to music and when looking at art, our default, kind of late 20th century concept is a historicist one. And if we're looking, for example, at the history of jazz, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of effort to go and listen to a 29 recording of Louis Armstrong and really try to put yourself into 1929 ears and see, what is this thing that made it special at the time and in context versus, hey, I'm listening to it. I'm listening to this 1929 recording because it sounds so charming and it sounds old and quaint and blah, blah, and old fashioned and all that stuff. Maybe it's beautiful. But unless you sort of take a step back and look at it and listen to it with 1929 ears,
Sure.
what you're missing is you're missing the innovation.
Yeah.
And you're missing what's going on in context. And I always kind of thought of these things as tied together. Either you take, you have philosophy or history, or political rhetoric, politics on one hand, or you have aesthetics on the other hand. The rejection of historicism is really important because otherwise you're just kind of, otherwise it's kind of silly and masturbatory.
Sure. So how do you define historicism? And let's just lay it out. Because for me, when I think historicism, I think Hegel, I think his dialectic, and that history progresses, right? History has a path, and we're kind of going somewhere. Is that how you mean it? And
yeah, I mean it in the most general sense because
okay.
it's got to be applied to, because it's got to be applied to everything. So,
Sure.
you're taking your values, your premises today, and you're putting them like a screen on over and on top of events, art, writing, some whatever it's known today as content in the digital age, some
Right.
content from the past.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it today through the lens, through a kind of modern lens, like let's read Shakespeare through the lens of queer feminist
right
theory.
Through gender studies, right?
Right. Which at the end of the day, of course, I mean, none of this tells you anything about Shakespeare.
Nothing. No.
Shakespeare is like I mean, Shakespeare is like the bottle, the wine. It's a new bottle, it's old wine.
Right.
So maybe that's a bad metaphor, but that's basically it. And it was kind of that impulse that led me to primary source text when it comes to Islamists.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where. And then
So
I know we wanted to wrap it back to Andrew, but Andrew was starting up. He wanted to start up a website. He had just done Big Hollywood and Big Government, and he wanted to do a foreign policy national security site, and it would be called Big Peace. And so he came and he was trying to kind of put together, because he wasn't really a national security guy. He wanted to put together a team of folks who kind of would do a good job on it and would bring together what he, the vision, execute the vision that he had in mind. And he didn't really have that strong of a vision in mind at that time.
Sure.
But yeah, I got involved, and I was running the site in many ways for a while, including recruiting writers and making sure things got published, and I mean all that stuff. And that's really when I learned how to run a website and schedule content and do things like that. And I mean, we had some great stories, and I mean, I just learned a lot. It was a fantastic apprenticeship with the master.
Yeah, that's great. So when you talk about I want to go back to historicism, because that's one of my buzzwords. As soon as I hear it, I'm like, this is interesting, because I do think all of our problems of today kind of can go back to historicism, and at least in every way, in most ways, I would argue. And so I want to understand So what do you mean by historicism applied to Islamists or Islamism? That sounds odd.
Uh,
Islam, I
Islamism
guess.
or Islamists?
Yeah, to Islamists, you
Yeah,
mean people kind of applying the, would you call it, the Western framework onto kind of
right.
a Middle Eastern world? So kind of not, you kind of view it as a removing of the context and a lens, putting on your own lens to someone
Sure,
else's actions.
sure. I mean, as an example, at that time there was at that time it was very difficult to actually get your hands on primary source material
Okay. What
in
kind of primary source material do you
mainstream
mean?
places. Oh, for example, I mean, I'm not talking about the Quran, but I'm talking about commentaries that are kind of orthodox classical commentaries that every Orthodox Muslim is familiar with.
Sure. So
Um,
like a Aquinas equivalence, but for, or like kind of how there's different commentaries throughout Christendom, a kind of Muslim equivalent. You're saying something like that.
I mean, I'm not so familiar with the Christian biblical commentaries. I am with the Jewish biblical commentaries, which is
Maimonides, then.
well, line by line by line by line.
Sure.
So here's a line from the original biblical text, and then here is 4 pages
Right.
describing in detail what that line, what that line means. Um, so you've got that. You've also got you've got the Sirah, which is the biography of Muhammad, which was kind of key because without the biography of Muhammad, the Quran cannot be deciphered.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Why is that?
because it was organized because it was organized not in chronological order of chapters, but in length order.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Yeah. So the whole book is out of order, and it only makes sense if you can put it into context. So there is a small debate about the surahs in the Quran and which order they sit in.
Oh, interesting.
So if you have different branches of Islam, sort of different jurisprudential traditions, they will say, okay, this is our order. Another one will have their own order, and and if you don't have the Sirah, which was the first biography of Muhammad written after his, some couple 300 years ago, 300 years after his death, nothing makes sense. And only using that source material can you go and look at the hadiths and look at and basically piece together Islam in a coherent way, because you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it before. It would only be guessing. And of course, when you talk about a religion, where which is supposed to be the Quran is supposed to be the uncreated word of God, it
Right.
really makes a difference if
Sure.
it's Surah 6 before Surah 2022.
Right.
It really, really makes a difference. So this was of the utmost importance, and Islamic scholars have taken this very seriously over
Oh, yeah.
over the years. So, but all these things at that time, you'd have to go to Amazon or you'd have to go to an Islamic bookstore to buy these things. These texts were available to Muslims in English very easily.
Really.
But if you would go to Barnes and Noble, if you would go to Borders at the time, all of the mainstream stores, they just didn't have any of this. Instead, they would have Karen Armstrong on Islam,
Sure.
just giving you a kind of nonsense propagandistic read. And I think Armstrong was a former nun who converted to Islam, and kind of very
Yeah.
kind of left-wing touchy-feely
Yeah.
stuff. And it's like, if you are let's say the Department of Defense, or you're in a position where it's your job to protect the United States from this threat, and your understanding of the threat doctrine is limited to a Karen Armstrong book or what you can buy at Borders, then you are completely negligent in your duties.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think it
You
was
know,
so hard for that information to get out there? I mean,
um,
why
I mean,
why why are we lagging in understanding kind of the Middle East and the Middle Eastern cultures?
I think we're I mean, because we're always lagging. I mean, I think this was true. This was definitely true during the Cold War. It's a lot easier to get a book written by some Westerner about the Soviet Union than
Sure.
it was to get Solzhenitsyn or stuff like that. Um, we do have a problem with primary source material, especially when it's old. People don't
Yeah.
like it. People don't like to read it. Um, and it is a heavy lift. I mean, it's a heavy lift
Sure.
in kind of every context. So I understand why a lot of people don't, um, don't don't read it.
Hmm.
But nevertheless, the people who have this as their job, they
Yeah.
better read it.
Right.
They have a moral obligation and a professional obligation to be
Absolutely.
reading it.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into it, and those were the things that were kind of my concerns and the concerns of my friends and colleagues
Sure.
who are working on some of this on some of this stuff too. And as kind of time went on and the threat changed, and the war on terror kind of ended in many ways, like at least we say the 9/11 and aftermath phase ended with the Arab Spring
Hmm.
and the turn from the turn of a lot of these Gulf states away from Islamism in a very kind of positive way. Um, I mean, it's been a remarkable development that nobody really wants to talk about. I mean, I've written about it a lot
Sure.
and talked about it a lot, but otherwise, it's something that is escaping the mainstream for a variety of different reasons.
Right. And so that leads me right to my next question is what are the reasons? We are it's kind of why I wanted to ask you why you got into foreign policy is that it's in the United States, I don't think it's the sexy topic, right? It seems like, I mean, it is when there's a
When
big
I was
war,
growing
when
up,
there's
it
a war
was.
going. Yes.
When
I
I
should,
was growing up, it definitely was.
I should clarify. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the end of the Cold War.
Right.
But look, I knew that I went to GW for school, and it was either NYU or GW, and
Sure.
NYU only offered a poli sci degree,
Hmm.
which wasn't too interesting, and GW offered an international affairs degree where I could get a concentration in what was basically Cold War history.
Hmm.
Cold War history right after it had ended,
Okay. Yeah.
which was totally wild. But I was sitting in these classes, and at the time it was Thomas Friedman had published The Lexus and the Olive Tree, and he was promising a kind of, it was very kind of Fukuyama end of history days, and everyone was talking about how prosperity and uh, you know prosperity would take care of everything, and sort of the old debates that we used to have about how to organize the world, world affairs,
Sure.
and what is the best form of government. All that's
That's
overtaken by
settled.
events. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
settled, it's
Yeah.
done, and now's the time to sit by the olive tree with our Lexus.
Right.
And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, these people are stupid. I didn't understand. I mean, I used to yell at my international law professor because I said, this whole, your whole field is a sham.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a sham because there's nothing beneath it. It's consensus agreement at
Yeah.
best. And
Yeah.
then once the consensus falls apart, you have nothing.
Right.
And, but yeah,
That's a unique position to take at the time, though, because it seems like that was the prevailing
I was
ideology.
right. I was a crazy person. I was a
Okay. Well,
crazy
yeah.
person at the
Okay.
time within that context. And you know what it did? It made me turn off to it made me turn off to all of it.
Really?
So for a period of a couple of years, I was like, I just, this was just nonsense, and I'm going to be playing music, and that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to be, I'm going to play bass and live in New York, and maybe play some jazz festivals in Europe, make some money there, and
Right.
basically live in Brooklyn or downtown Manhattan,
There you go. I mean, that's a fun life.
and
Yeah.
that kind of life. And I knew a lot of people. All my friends did it.
Yeah.
And that made a lot of sense to me. Kind of up until 9/11 and the aftermath.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. And then after that, you dug back into it and just started doing research and kind of
Yeah, I was still playing music, but I was
right.
finding myself more drawn to, it's like, hey, are you going to try to get gigs, or are you going to, read more, Hassan al-Banna? And I was sitting around, I was reading Hassan al-Banna. I found it more interesting. I found his whole concept, and the Muslim Brotherhood specifically, I found completely fascinating. And as soon as the Looming Tower came out, the Lawrence Wright book,
Mm-hmm.
which has problems. Later on, I noticed that it has problems, but at the time, it was really important because it got me started into digging into the Brotherhood specifically.
Sure.
And yeah, and I got kind of obsessed. And one day, I said, you know what, I need to be doing this for a living.
No, that's interesting. So how, I mean, this leads to kind of because you were a crazy person, uh, you're now kind of more at this forefront of this kind of dissident right movement that was against kind of all that end of history stuff before it was cool, right? We're kind of past that now. We've realized that
Right.
that was a sham. But the dissident right is still kind of in formation. There's kind of this turmoil going on, at least on the conservative side of the aisle. What do you think the foreign policy looks like under this kind of new style of conservatism? Because we know what it looked like under Bush. We know what it looked like when it
Right.
was, combating Obama. Trump mixes things up quite a bit. We don't talk about foreign policy nearly as much as we used to under Bush, right? The last 10 years, it's been pretty quiet. What does it look like? I mean, I don't know. There's
Right.
definitely the neocon kind of aggressive side to it, but there seems to be a very much if you want to call it isolationist side of things as well. So I'm kind of curious how you kind of view the landscape with that regard.
Yeah, I mean, a couple thoughts. First is I think the amount of people who are true isolationists
Mm-hmm.
today and really ever in the United States is vanishingly small.
Sure.
I think what many people describe derisively as isolationist would better be described as Jacksonian.
Sure.
And I don't know. I was just reading a piece that everyone needs to read, and I don't know why it took me so long. I had never read. I was a big fan of Jean Kirkpatrick going back to my days in high school. And of course, her Dictatorships and Double Standards is maybe the seminal piece for one of the seminal pieces for understanding how to deal with different regimes. But her piece for the national interest on the end of the Cold War in 1990 is so essential. It could have been written yesterday, and it could have been the Trump doctrine.
Really?
It's amazing. I shared it on Twitter, and I'm right now trying to come up with ways to kind of reintroduce it into the lexicon, but it almost doesn't need reintroduction because the ideas, I think, have been borne out by history, which is her point is, okay, the Cold War was over. This was a huge undertaking. We
Mm-hmm.
performed admirably. We
Mm-hmm.
fought a serious enemy,
Right.
militarily, economically, ideologically, and, in every way. The stakes could not have been higher.
Right.
And now let's go back to being a normal country.
Oh, who'd have thunk it? Yeah, normal
Yeah.
country. Yeah.
Let's go back to being a normal country because we've now entered a multipolar world
Mm-hmm.
where, where we need to reassess our security obligations. We need to reassess some of our not our alliances, but some of these agreements. We need to reassess trade.
Wow. Yeah.
And she even preempted some of the criticism from some of the free trade guys, because she said, no, this is not, an old style industrial policy. The government was created in order to serve its citizens. And she had a great quote in there too, where she just says, no, this is, there are no goals for the United States in foreign policy outside of protecting its citizens.
Right. That's interesting. I've had talks with people where they don't think that's the goal of the United States.
Sure.
It's shocking to me how opposed to national sovereignty we are as a country. I remember one time I was talking to a friend, said, I come from a very libertarian background. And I said, well, I don't really mind kind of trade barriers or protective stuff for industries. We're the strongest country in the world. We should get the best deals. We should use that to take care of ourselves. And I got called all sorts of names for being a jerk, because apparently I'm a jerk. Oh, America shouldn't be a jerk. We should be nice on the world stage. That's
right.
So I find that to be such an odd take on it, that, well, we shouldn't be selfish. We shouldn't be we can't be a dick. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean there's that. There's I think at the other end of the spectrum too is that a lot of the stuff isn't really thought out. You have a lot of elites, and this is another thing. Kirkpatrick nailed this too. She nailed the deep state in this essay, and it's amazing how much gold she has in like 4 pages, and where she just said, the American people by and large don't go in for any of this nonsense.
That's true.
The let's say the foreign policy clerisy has decided that this is what it wants to do, and even more importantly and damningly, it's decided that it's good at it.
Yeah.
It's decided that not only is conducting foreign policy, like this, totally removed from the national interest as understood by the majority of the people. Not only is that a good, we're also really damn good at it.
Yeah.
And which is the most absurd conceit.
Yeah.
That's possible. And I also the other really important thing to me that I read years ago was Walter Russell Mead's essay, I think also in the national interest, from long ago, called the Jacksonian Tradition, where he really goes into this kind of Jacksonian mold. And look, I'm a reformed neocon. Sure. I was a neocon for a while. I thrilled to the sentiments of the second inaugural, the Bush second inaugural, which ended up being, now I look at it today and I'm unbelievably embarrassed that I didn't see through the vapidity and insanity of some of that rhetoric. And I tried to make up for it by really going after it in my book that I recently published, Qatar's Shadow War. I have a little section on how the neocons got us here, and how the continuity from Bush to Obama in many respects in the Middle East was very negative, and also brought us to some let's say negative outcomes.
Sure. Yep. So when I agree with you, the public does not have a taste for any of this stuff. Do you think that's part of the reason why we don't hear about it anymore? Because I'm putting my tinfoil hats on a little bit, but part of me thinks a lot of the reason the rhetoric on the culture war gets so fired up and we have all these kind of distractions is so that we don't think about our foreign policy and the lives lost, the millions spent, the destruction, all of the side effects that come from this. And it's a little conspiratorial, but it seems to provide plenty of cover for the people that want to do these things to do these things.
Yeah, I don't have that conspiratorial, I don't have that particular view. I'm not sure if it's a purposeful deflection.
Sure. Well, prove me wrong. I'm interested in being proven wrong. I just know what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it works out that way, which I'm fine with. I'm fine with agreeing with that. Um, but I mean, what's reported in the press, what people talk about in the press, we know it's got no relation at all to what's what are the things happening that are most important. It's all guided by what will advantage the left at any given moment. So, for example, Jamal Khashoggi
Mm-hmm.
is and was in no way, in life or in death, important enough to have an insane orgy of coverage that
Yeah.
now has gone on for 3 years.
Yeah.
He just there's nothing, maybe 1 day, 2 days coverage,
Sure.
but to become to become this martyr for a cause. I mean, look, the Khashoggi thing was a perfect storm because it enabled the a lot of people on the left to take to go after Saudi Arabia,
Mm-hmm.
for frankly, it's the biggest sin for opposing the Iran deal.
Right.
And it also made the media into big martyrs. And I mean, it
Right.
got the
He
media
was
to
one of
talk
their
about.
own, right? He
Yeah,
was
I
a
mean,
journalist. He was one of their
of course,
people.
he was not a journalist. He was not really one of their own. But they were like,
Sure.
okay, close enough for
Yeah.
government work.
Close enough to
And
tell the
and
story, you know.
here's a story we can tell about the
Yeah.
heroism and sacrifice
Yeah.
and martyrdom of one of
Yeah.
us, and talk about how important the free press is. So yeah, so I mean, on one hand you have that. On another hand, you have events that are a lot more consequential in foreign places that don't get a tenth of the coverage, pro or con. I mean, even bad coverage.
Oh, well, you got to give an
Yeah.
example. You can't just tease it like that. What are we
Oh,
missing? Because I
yeah.
admittedly, this is a huge blind spot for me as well. I have some guesses, but if you did want to learn about foreign policy, I don't even know where I would turn to it. There's some Googling I could
Right.
do, but it's
So I
not
mean,
up there. It's not easy to get to. It required a little bit of work.
sure. So what's going on in Africa?
Yeah, I couldn't
What's
tell you.
going on in South
Yeah,
America?
yeah.
Most people can't tell you.
Right.
News happens there every day.
Sure.
Occasionally, there's a snippet that pops up through the transom, the New York Times or wherever.
Right.
Someone blows some shit up somewhere. Okay, that'll make the news. But
Right.
in the larger context, what's going on. Probably the best example I can think of is Libya.
Sure.
Out of nowhere, all eyes in the world were on Libya for a period of exactly 5 6 months. The five
Hmm.
6 months that it took for the United States to decide to go in, and then and sort of make a mess there, and then it was over.
Sure.
And today, what do you hear about Libya? I mean, occasionally you'll hear about a civil war with General Haftar and the kind of UN supported the UN and Turkey supported regime fighting against the kind of Gulf Arab supported military force. But other than that, you don't hear of it, and certainly it doesn't lead every broadcast the way it did when it was imperative that we destroyed Gaddafi.
Right.
So in those ways, that's how they shape coverage.
That's interesting. Yeah. So what's if we could kind of work on a framework for understanding this, that would be helpful for me because I have some general ideas as to how I understand the region, but I don't know, maybe you can help me dispel some rumors and help me kind of create a way to understand a lot of this conflict and who the big players are.
I
So
can
from
try.
yeah, well, I'll just say stupid things and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. Well, let's just
Okay.
go with that. As far as I understand it, kind of the big players are Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, and Israel, and they're all kind of vying for power and have their own kind of agendas within the Middle East. with maybe a little Russia thrown in there too. Am I far off? Decently okay?
No, that's basically it. To be more specific, there are two power centers
Okay.
that are competing. There's Israel, Saudi Arabia together,
Sure.
and Iran and Turkey together.
Okay. So I didn't even realize that they were kind of allied or on the same side of things.
Yeah, because and you could throw in you could throw in kind of traditional Syria.
Sure.
The Assad family is in there because they I mean, a lot of these countries kind of primarily define themselves as kind of axis of resistance. That's definitely true for Syria and for Iran. It's not true of Turkey, really,
Who are they
until
resisting?
Erdogan.
Who are they
Hmm?
resisting? Who are they
They're
resisting?
resisting the West.
The West,
So
America,
they're resisting the United States. They're
our
resisting
freedoms.
Israel.
Yes.
They're
Okay.
resisting, yeah, but not even like, I mean, they're not especially concerned about our freedoms. Here's the thing that I think a lot of folks don't get, especially if they're coming from a libertarian space,
Sure.
is that there will always be, for example, the U.S. and Russia will always be in conflict. Because they're two huge, let's say comparable,
Sure.
comparable countries. For example, Iran and Saudi Arabia will always be in conflict. Doesn't mean war has to break out, but
Sure.
there's always going to be something.
Right.
Japan and China, same thing. It's never gonna,
Right.
it's never gonna be like the U.S. and Canada.
Right.
It's just there are certain structural issues that will make it such that these countries will always be in competition, and that sometimes expresses itself in peace, sometimes it expresses itself in war, but it's a thing that doesn't go away, and that's one reason why you can't just say, okay, well, kind of let's have a totally libertarian view of foreign policy, because we can act in our own, in a kind of very narrow idea of our own self-interest, but we do have to recognize that we'd probably be the only ones who only act in a
Right.
non-ideological way.
Right.
And once we accept that, we say, okay, well, then we can start to talk and figure out what the other guys want. But yeah, so there are kind of structural things that will always be true about that region, and the Iran Saudi one is probably the biggest one. It's probably the biggest fault line, as is also Saudi and Turkey.
Is it religious based, or is it
Part of it is.
resources? Is it
Part of it is
geographical?
religious and
Okay.
history and geographical and resources and size and history.
Okay.
So I mean, between Saudi, between Saudi and Iran and Turkey, is you have three historical Islamic, let's say, brands,
Right.
and and they are in conflict, and the Saudis control the territory,
Hmm.
and in order for the Turkish or the Iranian view of Islam and that whole, the whole history to be victorious, they're going to have to take Mecca and Medina.
You mean conquer it?
Yes,
No
which
kidding.
is
So that's
what they wanted. Which is what they want to do. Yeah, I mean, it's not. I
interesting.
mean, they say it every single day. I mean,
Really?
a Turkish official said it yesterday, and an Iranian official, probably also said it yesterday. So this is a thing. I mean, whether or not they're going to attack tomorrow or
Sure.
whatever,
Yeah.
that's immaterial. But do they have visions of
Sure.
that? Sure, of course.
that
And
changes
you know,
everything. Knowing that there's even a desire or an underlying like want that whatever 100 years from now or when the opportunity is right that a an invasion or some sort of conquest would be required. That's a dynamic I knew nothing about. That's really interesting.
yeah, and it's something that a lot of the folks in kind of liberal internationalist world totally don't understand. Not, it's not that they don't understand it; it's that they refuse to accept it
Hmm.
because they're coming from a conflict resolution place,
Right.
and they're
So
saying, "Okay, what do I do to diffuse this?"
right. Are they just thinking like, well, we just got to, if we just convince Turkey that it's okay, or what are we,
Right,
and it's like, no, it's probably deeper than that. If it's religious or if it's, if it's God or if it's destiny that's calling you to do that, you don't, you have a hard time finding any sort of
right,
common ground or any sort of compromise when you've got, God on your side, when you're the righteous one, when righteousness dictates you have to do this, it would be
right,
sinful to compromise, right? It would be, compromise cannot be part of what you do.
right. And it's, I mean, it's the same thing with the kind of, what used to be the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is now the kind of Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Hmm.
Which is that you're wasting time on agreements that tinker at the border of this thing when at the end of the day nobody's interested in tinkering at the border.
Right.
Because tinkering at the border is going to end up creating more problems.
Yeah. That's a good point because it's not the end game isn't peace necessarily. I mean, it's peace, but only after you've gotten it all, right? Like
Well, right,
that's the end
right.
game. It's there will be peace once we win, right? I guess that's more the end game. But
Yeah, exactly. And this is what Angelo Codevilla writes about in his brilliant book, "Peace Among the Nations." It's something that I pointed, that it just I realized it a long time ago when I was a kid that, for example, organizations like the UN do more to perpetuate conflict than they do to solve it.
because they just
Um,
keep compromising and therefore
they
everyone's upset
Well,
and
they
anxious.
keep talks going. They say, okay, we're going to stop. We need a ceasefire. Okay, everybody stop. Okay, so there's a ceasefire before there's victory of one side. It doesn't even matter which side, but they say, okay, we're gonna have a draw here, a ceasefire, and now we're going to go in and we're going to have talks before we've settled on a victor.
Hmm.
Who's victorious and who's vanquished. We're going to go and we're going to have talks, and this ends up perpetuating this conflict.
Right.
It just keeps going. I mean, there's no better example of this than the UN with Israel.
Sure.
And what they're doing is they're perpetuating from the beginning. They've been perpetuating a conflict that could have been solved in 1948.
Right. Interesting. I've never thought of it like that. I mean, I think that's a great point, but there is um, if you want to call it liberalism or the West has at this point we have like an aversion to conquest. We have an aversion to winners and losers. And it would be
Sure.
so much easier to say, no, they win, rule justly or something like that. That would be almost an easier way to go about it. But because, yeah, why do you think there is that aversion? Why do why are we, it's such the history of humanity is a history of war, like conquest, and you know, I mean, this is who we are as people, and now all of a sudden we prefer bureaucracy and gridlock and perpetual conflict versus victors.
Yeah, I mean it's a big issue, right? It's a
Yeah.
big issue, and it has to do with a kind of I think it has to do with a civilization-wide move
Hmm.
from kind of definitive things, dealing with your stuff that you do with your hands and weapons and things like that, and sort of moving these these old things, these old ways into a modern bureaucratic setting
Yeah.
where things like where the things that are prized are the ability to maneuver within a bureaucracy, or the
Right.
ability to backstab and leak and
Yeah.
and do all these things. It's a completely, I mean, it's a completely different skill set, and
It really is.
it's a different way of understanding. I mean, you could say, sure, that it's more sophisticated because you're not shedding a lot of blood, but it's kind of just as let's say it's just as psychically taxing.
Right. Or and
Yeah.
it's prolonged. I think about when you think about like
Yes.
conflicts between men. What do? You just go outside, you beat each other up a little bit. Usually there's a winner and a loser, but the winner acts kind of honorably and doesn't, murder the guy, and it's just okay. It's been settled. Oftentimes they come out, going to the bar and drinking together, right? There's almost a camaraderie built up with that, which is a whole other thing. But to me, that whole no, we'll just duke it out and settle it and be done. We've lost that, I think, as a society or as a culture. I mean, we've transitioned to more of this passive aggressive, backstab, political posturing, getting in good with certain people, and it's no longer just let's just handle this.
Right.
Things are really handled these days.
Yeah. Right. I mean, exactly. HR departments.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a great example of how to go and how to kind of hire and fire utterly bloodlessly.
yeah,
And with all kinds of euphemisms and all this stuff. Yeah, I think it's a civilization wide answer,
hmm
and a lot of people kind of more attuned to this particular space could offer better theories on why it is. But I mean, the thumbnail sketch version is that it's I mean, we're dealing with a civilization in decline.
sure. So do
Um,
you do
yeah.
you subscribe to the theory that we're kind of in the decadent phase of our civilization?
Oh
It's kind of
yeah.
Ross. Is it Ross Douthat? Ross Douthat? I don't know how to pronounce the last name. I want to
I
avoid it.
mean, you could think of it as Spangler or Nietzsche.
Sure, sure. There's a bunch of them, I guess.
But
Yeah, he's
right,
hardly
right,
the original. Yeah,
right. Um, and yeah, I mean, I mean, for sure, for sure, the cycle of regimes is a real thing.
hmm
And I think I mean, the cycle of regimes is a real thing. Um, and then what was really important to me years ago was the fourth turning,
sure.
the Strauss and Howe book. And even more important was I found a friend of mine found a blog called Generational Dynamics
Oh, interesting.
right after 9/11, and it was a guy named John Xenakis, who was a mathematician, who decided to take the Strauss and Howe generational dynamics theory and apply it to foreign affairs.
Okay. Well,
So Strauss and
walk me
Howe,
through that one. Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. So Strauss and Howe dealt with America,
hmm
and they said, okay, we've got basically a block of four generations, each
hmm
of their own character, with their own characteristics. And it's another way of talking about the cycle of regime
Right.
in compressed miniature form. And
Right.
then you have these 4 unit blocks, another 4 unit block the same, and then as we go. And Xenakis said, wait a minute, if we zoom out and we look at the world, we'll see that one country has this unit of blocks, another country is at a different spot,
Right.
third country is yet at another spot. So, in order to predict relations between two countries, are they going to go to war? Is the government going to topple? Because Tanaka said these are kind of like, let's say they're hard and fast rules, not just for America but for every civilization.
Sure.
You'll be able to see, for example, like here is here is France, and then England is here at a different point, and that will mean once extrapolated upon, that will mean that a conflict between France and England will be different, in 1900 than it would be in 1945,
Sure.
just because the generations are or not in alignment.
Right.
And
It's
he
different
used this.
generations fighting each other, right? You would have.
Right, right,
Yeah.
at different points. So, for example, one of the things that he really kind of that made a lot of people notice his blog was because during the Iraq War, people were talking about a civil war
Mm-hmm.
in Iraq between Shia and Sunnis.
Right.
And Zanak said, "Nope, it's not going to happen." And they
Gotcha.
said, "Why? All the news, everybody says it's going to happen. Of course, it's going to happen." He's
Yeah.
like, "Nope, it's not." He's like, "The generation, it's not time for it yet. If it's going to happen,
Not time
it's
for it yet. Yeah.
it needs another whatever 20 years." And I liked this analysis so much, I recruited him. He was the first person I recruited for Breitbart
Okay.
as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was not really a right winger. I mean, I think he was a conservative, but he was not to the right. I need to check up on him to see where he is. I'm hoping he's still alive.
Yeah. Wow. So what does it say now about America and what country's the rising generation? Is it China?
Oh, I
Is it
I
the
don't
giveaway?
I don't know. I need to go back, and so this is homework for me because once I go down the generational dynamics rabbit hole,
Is it
then
just yeah?
I mean, it's just so depressing. And you know what? He was talking about pandemics in in like 2004, and
That's wild.
he's like, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and but then again, a lot of people. I mean, Strauss and Howe talked about pandemic, a great pandemic hitting right about now
Yeah.
when they wrote their book in the late 90s.
Yeah. I find that that's been kind of a weird subplot of 2020 is all the people who predicted pandemics happen at the kind of the decline or of a civilization, which I find that causal relationship is one that is not obvious to me. It seems more happenstance. I don't know. Do you know? Do they
I,
discuss a
I
reason for it?
I don't know. I agree with you. I think I have the same thought. It's like, hey, you've heard this is a thing that keeps
Yeah,
happening,
yeah,
and I'm not sure exactly why.
yeah,
I mean, I could tell you, for example, that I mean, we know that had this pandemic happened, had COVID happened 10 years prior,
yeah.
it would be a totally different scene.
Right. Oh, completely
We would have
different.
never had lockdowns. We would have had
No.
never. I mean, because now people can work from home. It doesn't
Right.
affect them.
Sure.
They really, people don't give a shit. Okay, I'll order Uber Eats. Who cares?
Sure. Maybe is it that just it that only in decline do people actually care about pandemics? I
All
don't know.
right. That's a good observation.
That's the only thing I
Which
can maybe
whereas
think of.
whereas before they would just weather it and would be like, okay,
Right.
yeah, we had a pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Meh.
People are getting sick now. Yeah.
Right.
Whereas, things are good and now it's, well, why is everybody getting sick? Or, there's also that it's easy to have fear of catastrophe, right? I think there's a lot of the end of the world is always coming in a lot of ways. And if you're kind of in a decadent phase of your society, probably the end of the world probably feels a little bit sooner, right? It's a little too good.
Yeah,
Bad times are
you're
coming.
looking at science.
Right.
Even if you think that this bullshit is going to last forever, which is
Right.
stupid
Right.
to think so. But even if you do,
Yeah.
and you're dumb enough to believe that, and you go and you see in the back of your mind, that something is not right.
Yeah. I mean, we all know how the world works. The good times never last. Okay. That's how it goes. And, I don't think during the Great Depression, people were like, well, the end of the world's coming. They're like, no, the end of the world is here. We've got to build a new world. So it would make sense to me that psychologically a society would be more attuned to a pandemic during decadency, during decline. But I'm just spitballing. I don't know. Maybe.
Could be.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I would sign on to that.
Great. I convinced you onto my decadency pandemic theory. I'm gonna
Write it out.
Yeah, I'm gonna pedal it out. It'll be great. Yeah. Let's see. What are the things? I want to talk to you about bodybuilding, if that's okay. Huge subject change, but I know you're a bodybuilder.
Sure.
I've seen the pictures. You're yoked.
Oh, thank you.
You are a jacked fella. Yeah. What's how long you been bodybuilding for?
Seriously, last couple of years. I started going to the gym regularly in 2010.
Okay. Well, why?
Because it's something I always wanted to do. I mean, I had been to the gym And when I was playing music, it was a thing that I just sort of couldn't maintain the discipline
Mm-hmm.
of doing it all the time. But it was, fits and starts. I mean, I knew that I kind of wanted to do this, and I knew that, I wanted to look and feel a certain way, and it was, and but it was only in 2010 that I decided, hey, there's a gym, 3 blocks from my office. I'm just going to go every night. And I got a trainer, and he was not so good, but he showed me the basics.
Okay.
He showed me the basics. And I tell you, like, I really did learn how to, in the gym, I was great. I was great in the gym. It was great, but I didn't know how to eat.
Sure.
And that was the big thing. And it took a long time for me to learn how to eat and to dial it in. And I mean, I knew that I had to eat more protein, right?
There you go.
So I just ate more, and I ate more. And at the gym, I was having, tough workouts, and I would be, seeing results. But I looked fat.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's basically, I had a good, a good 7 or 8 year, a good 7 year bulking phase.
There you go. A nice
Um,
solid 7-year bulk. Yeah.
right. Which is, what, at the end of the day, it's better to do that than to sort of do nothing at all.
Sure.
And because then, I managed to build up a decent amount of muscle.
Yeah.
And, so that when I cut, it doesn't look so bad.
Right. It's like that Always Sunny in Philadelphia, right? You're accumulating mass, and then like the sculptor David just chiseling it away, and underneath it all there's the
Right.
stone, right? That's
Right.
you did that over 7 years. You accumulated mass for 7
Yeah. Eight. Yeah. Yeah. So it's been, and then when I moved to Florida, one of the reasons I moved to Florida was I knew that, that doing, sort of living this lifestyle in DC, it was very difficult. It was difficult because I didn't really find other people who were also doing it.
Sure.
I felt alone, number one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Number two is the snow was hard. I mean, that last year I spent in DC,
Yeah.
as I put on all the, the coat and the this and the that, and probably 3 times I got caught at the gym in the snow, like snowed in.
Oh,
Like,
geez.
this is no good. This is just
That's
total bullshit. And it's like,
yeah.
it's like, 8 p.m. The snow's coming down hard, and I'm leaving to go to the gym. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, what am I, a maniac?
Yeah.
Am I going to walk home?
Yeah.
Um, and and then I started coming to Florida because my grandparents passed away in 2017, and I would come and use their apartment.
Okay.
So I had the keys, and I was in DC, and sometimes, you just need to get away and get out of the swamp. So, it's a
Yeah.
cheap ticket to fly down.
Sure.
And I would spend a week or so down here,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd walk to the gym. I'd sit out on the balcony. I'd have a great life.
Yeah.
And then I thought, why am I not doing this all the, full
That sounds
time?
great. Sunshine,
Yeah.
working out, maybe a margarita here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what, so I kind of made plans to, do that. I should have done it before, but it's fine. I came here before before COVID,
Before the rush. Yeah.
and before the rush, so that, and so that I end up becoming the welcoming committee in South Florida
There
when
you go.
new based people come to town,
There you go.
or move here. I mean, everybody calls me. I don't have, 2 or 3 days that go by without phone calls or text messages or DMs, or something from people who are looking to, who are on the right,
Yeah.
who are looking to move to South Florida. So I try to help them as much as I can, because we do need all the help we can get, because we want to keep this place relatively sane.
Sure. That Florida was one of obviously the 2 states I was looking at, Florida or Texas, right? Those are the great migrations right now, especially I'm in New York, and I need to get out of here.
You're in the
Because
city?
I was in the city before Rona.
Mm.
I'm now upstate
Okay.
after the pandemic, just because once it hit, I was like, I need to get out of the city just for my safety, my fiance's safety. I just didn't.
Right.
I When it started again, we didn't know what it was going to be. I think now that we know, it's a little more chilled out. But uh, I remember in February thinking this could get iffy.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the writing is on the wall as far as these places are concerned. These blue states, I think. Um, there are a lot of conservatives in blue states.
Yeah,
Um, though I just, I and what you get from a lot of people is, hey, don't leave us because then you'll make it really impossible for us to win again, and da da da. Guess what? You're not going to win.
yeah,
Better to be around. Better to utterly depopulate your state of right wingers. Send them to a place like Florida or Texas or any one of the other states that are like, I mean, go to Georgia.
oh
Georgia's a
yeah,
great state.
oh yeah,
Help shore up that. Help shore up help shore up Georgia. I mean,
yeah,
that's where the fight's gonna. Make sure
oh
that
yeah,
every purple state gets pushed to red.
yeah.
You know,
No, I definitely think that's the way to do it. I also think it's quality of life is just better when
yes,
you're at least surrounded by people who don't hate your guts. When I lived in Brooklyn, it was, well, not I can't give my political opinions, can't drink too much at this
right.
bar and start going off on what I think about anything.
Where did
There's
you live in Brooklyn?
Williamsburg. I was among the hipsters.
I lived in
It was,
Bushwick
oh, did you? Oh, my fiance lived in Bushwick when we met in the city.
in 2002.
Oh, you were in Bushwick when it was a
When
different
every
place, huh?
night we heard. I mean, it was a 4,000 square foot loft,
Uh-huh.
and it was four of us living there.
Okay.
So each person had about 1,000 square feet of giant empty.
Just
Just there was you had to use a wrench to turn on the water in the shower.
oh man. That you were there during like the struggle days, right? I was there during the decadent days. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a struggle during it was those days. It was a struggle.
Yeah.
When I
You
moved into that place and I
yeah.
pulled up in the U-Haul with my buddy, there was a car on fire in front of the building.
See, yeah, you gentrified the place. I just
Yeah.
showed up afterwards to eat at the Whole Foods. That yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
stand on the
yeah.
shoulders of giants, you being one of them. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Thank you.
Look, somebody had to do it.
Yeah,
Somebody
no,
had to do it.
I had a great time there and felt safe the whole
Yeah.
time. So thank you.
No, I mean it's like you know, in so I've lived that life.
Sure.
The
Mhm.
artist living in the garrets, just like you know, I mean, I don't want to say parody, but it was different. It was archetypal.
Okay. In that
Um,
the struggling artist, you mean that?
Playing right,
Mhm.
playing music and doing that thing. In New York City and also in San Francisco,
Sure.
in a kind of similar type of, let's say, socioeconomic, place. And now it's a lot different, and I want different things and all this stuff. And I think there's a tendency of folks on the right to be a little more judgmental about that whole artistic experience
That's very true. Oh,
than
absolutely.
than I think is necessarily warranted. I mean, do I wish that I had been advancing my professional career as it is right now at that time,
Mhm.
while I was living life playing music and I mean, in some ways, yes, of course, I would
Yeah.
be better situated in life had I not spent 10 years doing that. On one hand, on the other hand, I spent 10 years doing that at the
Yeah,
peak of what will inevitably be the last gasp of jazz in New York City.
sure. Oh, yeah, you have
Um,
stories now. You have memories.
yeah, yeah, I
You
got
know?
to meet and play with my heroes,
Yeah.
and
They
and
can't take
and
that
that's
from you.
something. No, no, they can't. And it's like, but it's always you always feel like, did I waste that time? Of course, I didn't waste that time.
Right.
Because it makes you who you are, and I guess I bring a different experience and perspective to things, especially with this. I mean, that said, I always had this politics.
Right.
I
So how
always,
was it?
always had this politics.
Guaranteed you were one of the few, though. How was that life living, being the conservative, the Republican, that those types of
I
politics
didn't
among
talk
the
about it. I knew who I
yeah,
could. I knew who very quickly what you can get away with, and I
right.
was just like, there's no need for me to talk about this stuff with people. I mean, I remember going to see my next door neighbor who was a world famous musician
Hmm.
on 9/11 that afternoon.
Yeah.
He lived next door.
Yeah.
And I popped in and I said, look what's going on there. And he says, I don't see what the big deal is about. They're just buildings.
Oh, wow. Huh.
I was like, what?
That's wild.
Like, well, there's people in the buildings.
Yeah, that's a heck of a
Lunatic,
yeah,
like
yeah,
the people at work. Like, I know you've never worked an office job in your life,
yeah, yeah,
but no, but you
yeah,
certainly do know that that building was full of people.
yeah, yeah. It's not a tragedy because the
Uh,
buildings fell. It's a tragedy because the
right,
people died, right? Like, it's
right,
not. Yeah.
right.
So that's a
You
wild
know,
take that he had.
it's a way. Yeah, I mean, talk about a hot take.
Yeah,
That's like a
that's a
salon
hot.
take.
Yeah, yeah, that
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
and
Wow.
so who you could talk to, and I mean, the fun thing though is that over the years, I lost probably 95% of my friends from those days
Sure.
to the politics,
Oh, of
especially as I've
course.
become more outspoken in, I mean, this is one reason I don't go on Facebook anymore, because
Oh, yeah.
it's full of people from the old life.
Yeah.
And but what's been really awesome and gratifying is that occasionally I'll get, and occasionally I would get some little instant messages or DMs or emails or something that say, hey, I love what you're doing.
Nice. That's got to feel great.
Yeah, it feels great. And it's like, oh my God, this person is like this person, let's say, is a is a you know people who are figures in the jazz world that people would know
Yeah.
are sending me DMs being like,
Yeah.
right. And you know what? I don't blame them for being quiet. Some of them are actually not quiet, but but it is what it is. I'm gratified that they say, here, whatever, you're out there speaking for me, and I love it. And I mean, even that little word of encouragement is good. I mean, not
Sure.
every I understand in this business, not everybody can be outspoken. Not everybody has that level of comfort and the thick skin required. I mean, there are people who, you know, would love to get into political commentary, but the minute they're attacked, they would just, they don't have the personality for it. They don't have the personality to say fuck off.
Right.
Um, but so that's why it kind of rests on the shoulder of the people who have a more thick skin and a more
Yeah.
combative personality to
Right.
to wage these battles.
So do those messages kind of give you hope for the future, just to know that not all is lost, if that makes sense? Because I know uh, I my artistic endeavor, which was I never took 10 years in New York to pursue jazz, but I loved stand-up comedy and doing kind of the comedy scene and that whole thing in Austin, Texas, and later New York a little bit before it all went to hell. And it was similar, right? You kept your beliefs low. Occasionally somebody had like a little trigger word they would say where it's like, oh, they're conservative. I know what they meant there. Oh, they said they hate monopolies. That's interesting. Like there's little actual dog whistles that signal that someone is perhaps a conservative or not a progressive.
Right.
But it can be hard to be kind of a conservative in that world. So do people reaching out to maybe go, okay, maybe the culture isn't lost. Maybe there's, or if not, I mean, the culture is lost, but maybe there's an anchoring in there. Yeah, sorry, it has been lost, but maybe it's not a complete defeat. Maybe the ground hasn't been salted yet. Maybe
Right.
there's something there.
No,
No.
I mean,
Fair enough.
it,
All right.
yeah. I mean, here's what gives me hope. I mean, maybe we're saying the same thing. Could be.
Sure. All right.
But here's what gives me hope. It gives me hope when, I mean, I've got a friend from the New York Jazz days. We were inseparable. We lived,
Sure.
Very close to one another. So every night we'd go out to see shows, and every night we'd come back together. On the subway or in a cab or whatever, and without fail, at 4:00 in the morning, we'd be at a diner, before we went home.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be eating my, cantaloupe and cottage cheese.
Oh man!
At 4 a.m. with a cup of black coffee, and chain smoking.
I was about to say, and those Winstons, for your health.
Exactly.
All for your health. Yeah.
But it's funny because I always, like, he was always kind of irreverent about politics. Like he just didn't care. And then out of nowhere, he starts, I don't know what I think I went up to New York and we went record shopping, and he turned to me and he's like, do you listen to Sargon?
Oh, there you go. There's the end right there. That's the code.
Yeah. And I was like, really? And it turns out he's sitting here. He's basically, spends all day, at the record store or at home or whatever, and he's listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
And YouTubers who are saying, and I said, yeah, of course. And we ended up, talking about Jordan Peterson and about Rubin and Rogan and all this stuff, sort of back when that was first starting to
right,
pop.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so you're on Twitter, right? Like, no. Like, okay, so how do you interact with anybody? He's like, oh, I don't. I just watch the videos. And that's when it hit me. I was like, wow, you mean to tell me there's an entire politically aware universe of folks that are they're not talking shit on Facebook, they're not talking shit on Twitter, but they're just taking in the information. They're like watching Tim Pool and probably 15 other people. It's like, okay, that's it. But I'm not going to I don't feel the need to engage in the Twitter or Parler or Gab, like engage in the social media aspect. I'm just going to be a sort of passive viewer. I mean, he's got his own opinions and likes to talk about them or whatever, but I didn't know that this type of person existed because I took for granted that people who would be politically interested would also be wanting to participate.
Right. Yeah. I think that you can make that assumption, right? Like you'd think that even on some minor levels, like, well, I'm gonna at least go to Twitter and with my 100 followers or whatever, spout off because that's what I want to do. But I mean, to me, with politics taking over our entire culture, it's kind of filled the role of sports. So there's a lot of sports fans that don't play pickup basketball, right? They just watch the sports and they do something else. I think that there's varying degrees of people. You got your professional athletes, you got the person who goes to like the rec gym, person who plays with their friend, and then the person who just watches ESPN at home. And I think that's
and the person who
listens,
this person who listens to sports talk radio.
Yeah.
And the person who calls into sports talk radio.
Yes, exactly. And there's a difference between the two.
Correct.
And just like there's a difference between, like, my dad listened to Rush Limbaugh his whole life. Yep. He never called in and he was never going to call in. But boy, did he appreciate the people that did call in. It was one of those kind of things.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was me. I grew up with Rush too.
Yeah. So there is that kind of, I don't know, there's that silent majority is cliched, and I don't know if they're the majority, but there is that, I don't know, that quiet person out there that I think, I don't know, I appreciate it whenever I meet one of them in the wild because they'll.
Right. No, but that's good. I mean, now, and it's probably been, at least about 10 different times that I've been spotted on the street here.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool.
Wait. What's that like?
On Twitter.
Yeah, you're so
At
famous that
first,
people are people
yeah, and
yelling
I'm
at
not
you.
famous. I mean, that's the funny thing is I'm not famous.
Oh, you got like
Um,
130,000 followers or something like that.
yeah, but
Dude,
that's
that's
not
great.
famous.
That's
But
Twitter
that's not,
famous.
that's
That's something.
that's. I mean, I've been out on dates
Uh-huh.
where a dude will walk up and and of course, I mean, it's really impressive to the chick.
I was about to say, yeah, that's a great thing to happen on a date. I wish that
It's a
happened to
good,
me when I
yeah.
was dating.
They look,
Hey, you're
yeah,
the guy.
they look at me and like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
Um, because I end up dating women who are usually not on or not big Twitter people.
Sure.
Uh, but yeah, so it's happened. I mean, it just happened. What, yesterday? Yeah, it just happened yesterday.
Yeah.
Sitting in a doctor's waiting room, and a guy comes up to me and says, "I know who you are."
That's wild.
And I mean, it happened at the gym a week before. So it's really it's wild. And the first thing you always think, like, you're bracing. You're
Right.
thinking like,
I
is
mean,
this
you got to
person
think they're
going to
looking for
shoot
a
me?
fight, right? Yeah. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Especially how they begin. Like, one the guy at the gym says, we got the blue check mark here.
Nah, okay. He's giving you a little bit of a hard time. That's good.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I turned around and I was like, huh,
Yeah.
okay.
All right.
And he ended up, no, I mean, and everybody ends up being like, a lovely person, thank goodness.
Yeah.
And
What we need to do is get you
and
like a motto or a slogan so they can yell it at you across the street or something like that.
yeah, I should
A
probably come up
catchphrase.
with one.
We
Right,
get
a
you a
catchphrase. Oh,
catchphrase, and then you'll just be walking around and you'll just hear some who the hell was that? Yelling
right,
at
right, right,
great,
right.
yeah, just echoing throughout your whole life. There.
And here's the thing. If you think of 10 times in the last year
Yeah.
that someone has spotted me and said something, how many times has someone spotted me and not said something?
Right. Oh, it's got to be way more. 10 times as
Yeah,
many. Yeah.
yeah, because sometimes you're like, yeah, I'm not gonna say anything.
Right. Well, that's the people that come up to you. They're the rush callers, right? They're the
Right,
people that call in to
right.
rush. The people calling to you versus all the people who just, oh, that's the guy right there. How many people have secretly taken a picture of you, and they have it on their phone, and they're showing it off at parties, and like,
I
look who
never
I
thought
saw.
of that.
He was eating a
I
Cuban
don't. I
sandwich,
doubt it.
and
I
it's not
doubt
a
it.
good picture, but like I think it's him. Yeah, yeah.
No, I can't. I can't. I
Oh
mean,
no.
I've got buddies who are far more famous
Yeah.
on Twitter, um, and I hear, like, they tell me what happens, and I mean, it's always really nice.
It's good.
It's always really nice, and I'm amazed. Dude, the guy recognized me when I had my mask on.
The mask, dude. You're jacked. You have a shaved head. You're not exactly a blend in kind of a
No, but
person,
how many?
man.
But how many? Yeah, but unless you see the face, I
Ah,
mean, you
yeah,
don't know. I mean, there are plenty of guys
yeah,
with big shoulders and bald
sure.
heads, and
Maybe he saw you
you
there
know,
like the day before or something like that, and then he
yeah.
recognized it. Yeah.
He ended up being like a pharmaceutical rep, like a Cuban pharmaceutical
Oh
rep.
wow. Huh.
It was just, I mean, just based as hell,
Yeah. Well, he's Cuban,
and he
so
was
he's
just a total riot. Yeah,
yeah.
total riot.
That's hilarious. That's awesome. All right. Well, let's end it there. I appreciate you coming on and talking to me for this long, and this is a great talk. I appreciate you explaining
Thank you very
foreign
much.
policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. I learned a bunch, and I had a great time, dude. So thank you. This was awesome.
Appreciate it.